Hello and welcome to the Pagan Portal Podcast, produced by Moonbooks Publishing and presented by me, Rachel Patterson. If you prefer to listen to audio only, please hop on over to Spotify. If you would like early access to all of the wonderful things we have on YouTube, please consider becoming a member. And if you would like to follow us, please hit the subscribe button. Today, we welcome, and I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, the Witch of Salopia,
Yeah, that
Welsh
sounds right.
Welsh Marches folk witch, Brett Hollyhead. Welcome.
Hi, you okay?
Well, I'm not looking forward to any Welsh pronunciations, I must admit.
Oh, don't worry, neither am I. It's fine.
Is it Salopia? Is
Yes,
that
Salopia,
right?
yeah.
Cool. Excellent. So after that, all of those wonderful words that don't mean an awful lot to me, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yep, so my name's Brett, as you said. I'm a Welsh Marches folk witch. I'm a loud and proud queer, and in my spare time, when I'm not causing havoc to society and being a menace in general, I'm either frolicking about on TikTok making videos about folklore, or you can find me pole dancing or crocheting at home. I'm pretty much an all-rounded person with many, many interests and things in different pies.
That's quite an eclectic mix. Really.
It is. I get bored
Crocheting
easily. I
and
go from one
pole
thing to another.
dancing. If the viewers haven't seen your TikTok yet, you do need to follow it. It is absolutely amazing. It's just shenanigans of all types.
Oh, thank you.
Now, what about your spiritual pathway? How would you describe that?
Yes, so I classify myself as a Welsh Marches folk witch. So folk witch itself is inherently tied around the intrinsic cultural practices, customs and celebrations that's found within a specific type of people or within a bioregionalism. So as a Welsh Marches folk witch, mine's inherently situated around the counties that comprise the Welsh Marches. So that's both the farthest western side of England that you can find and the eastern side of Wales itself, as well as the whole entirety of Wales. So as a child, many people think I'm from Shropshire specifically, which I am, but I grew up half my time and still do now in Wales. So I was inherently surrounded by the culture of Wales as a young child. My family are half English and half Welsh, so we're a bit of a mixed breed. So my practice and the foundation of that is formed from the folklore of my home, from the cultural practices, from the language, and to the everyday customs. So that's inherently my spiritual practice. I didn't grow up that way. I found that way through later on in my adulthood as a practicing witch. I started off with nothing Wicca when I was very young, finding all these wonderful books that I could curse my bullies at school with, and they did work. They were fabulous. Oh, they were brilliant. It was one way never to get bullied again. You know, people were too scared of the local witch going around.
Indeed.
But I kind of grew up in a very spiritual free household. I wasn't restrained by any kind of overarching monotheistic dogma, as I like to put it. My mom did have a bit of a spiritual breakdown halfway through my life and decided on a whim to throw out all my witchcraft practicing tools because she thought I killed her sunflowers. I mean, yeah, of course. So I had to be taken to a church, and honestly, I remember standing there and they were all praising Jesus, speaking in tongues, and I looked at my mom and thought, am I dead? Is this real? And I had to go to summer camp, a Christian summer camp. I mean, you can imagine their looks when I turned up with my hair all long, eyeliner, high heels. They loved me. But I found my way into my practices today, pertaining to my home. And now I'm part of the Welsh language, Coven Cilch Sarfesgoch, which is inherently continue on with that Welsh continuum.
That sounds so amazing when it's actually said properly.
Oh, thank you.
It's a beautiful language. I am in awe of being able to speak it beautifully. It does sound amazing.
Oh, thank you.
Now, I did struggle with the Witch of Salopia. Where does that name? Because it's the name that you're known by, isn't it? What does it actually mean? Where does it come from?
Yeah, so when people first tell me, what their first impressions of my name, they almost, I don't know, it almost sounds to me like a wash machine product, like the whole Calgon Salopia. I don't know, to me it rubs off that way. But it kind of wasn't the name that I originally wanted to choose, to be fair. So the word Salopia, you can see it on many of the signs if you go into Shropshire itself, where you'll see Floriat Salopia, which is a Latin term that means may Shrewsbury or Shropshire forever flourish. But the term itself derives from a Anglo-French word from the Norman invasion. So it's like a shortened down version of Salopia. So when they invaded in 1066 during their conquest, they came across the Anglo-Saxon settlements and saw the name and thought, you know what, we can't pronounce that. Absolutely no way. So they shortened it down to Salopia. So the shortened term of it is Salopia, and it does refer to someone who is a Salopian or someone who's from Shropshire. But I originally wanted to call myself the Witch of Pengwern, which is the old Welsh name for Shropshire to denote the kingdom that once existed there around in the before the 7th century, should we say. And that was confused to many people. When people try to ask me what it means, I'd say, it means the head of the alder grove, which is very beautiful in terms of the Welsh language. But then when people automatically hear it, they think, you're the Witch of Penguins. Not penguins, Pengwern. And then it's a whole...
I don't have a problem with that. Penguins are cool.
Absolutely. Penguins practice witchcraft. Absolutely.
You could have a whole coven of penguins. That would be excellent.
Oh, that's a conspiracy theory waiting to start. They're all witches.
But, you heard it here first.
Yeah, you heard it here first. But so rather than calling myself that, I call myself Salopia because throughout my work and throughout the stuff I do in terms of my writing, in terms of my talks, people know that I delve into the Welsh aspects of the margins in terms of history of Shropshire, Hereford and Cheshire. And so Salopia, though it does denote the term Shropshire, it denotes everything of that, all the aspects I funnel into it.
I love it. I love that you are so rooted in your area. That to me is a huge thing, being connected to the land that you live on. I think that's the base of witchcraft for me.
Oh, absolutely.
Is that connection. Yeah, brilliant. So I am very excited today to be talking about your first book with Moon Books, which is all about the goddess Sabrina. It is very dear to my heart. I have known of Sabrina for many, many years, from films, actually, from Humphrey Bogart's Sabrina Fair, and then there was a remake in the 80s as well. My daughter's middle name is Sabrina.
Lovely.
After the nymph, the goddess. So very, very close to my heart. So I was really excited when you put the proposal in for this one. But why? Why Sabrina for you?
So I've grown up Sabrina, or Havren as we call her in Welsh, my whole entire life. So as I said before, I grew up on both sides of the border. But wherever I was, whether it was with my mother in Shropshire or my father and grandparents in Wales, it was always next to the River Severn, which is the longest river in Britain. It flows for 220 miles, and in that river contains the coalescence of history, of folklore, of magic, and of mystery. And as a child growing up, I was enveloped in that. As a child, I learned about her stories, all the different aspects of her within terms of the Welsh aspects, in terms of the English aspects. And when I came to write about the book or put in a proposal to Moon Books, which I'm very happy that you accepted me, thank you so much. It seemed to me that there was only two main stories that were circling around which pertained to Sabrina. So it was either her being the victim of a innocent drowning when she was the result of vindictive outrage from a whole load of history and Geoffrey Mama stories, or she was this,
good old Geoffrey.
Good old Geoffrey, yeah. Good old Geoffrey. Or she was this nature spirit that came from Pimula Monbawd, where she originates from, along with her sisters. And I thought to myself, there has to be more. This is the longest river in Britain, and yet within wider Celtic paganism, or in paganism in general, she seems to be slept upon. There's not much reverement of her in terms of other more popular deities within Celtic continuum or within other pantheons. And I thought to myself, there has to be more. There has to be more. And there was. So I dug down deeper into my own cultural nexus, into my own roots, and found my own customs. And I found that there was a huge assembly of magic that has been practiced with the river in terms of different beliefs, as well as from the ancient past all the way into the modern period. And just how fundamental she was as a goddess in terms of British identity and the formulation of that in the Tudor period. And also how she emigrated over to America. So, it's true what they say, water connects everything. It is cyclical in its nature. And so I thought I have to write about and have to get this out to show that, this goddess is worthy of reverence. She is worthy of people's attention, and that she needs to be put out there more for the public, especially now when we're experiencing such environmental crisis in terms of our waterways and our rivers.
Yeah, I'm all for resurrecting, for want of a better word, the more unknown deities. Definitely,
absolutely.
Yeah, she's worthy of it. That's for sure. Actually, the story I'm familiar with, mostly familiar with, is the water nymph one. So, is she a water nymph? Is she a goddess? Is she both?
Oh, this is a complicated question, and a few times when I was writing the book, it kind of threw me off. It challenged me to change my perspective and my perception of the goddess herself. So I think throughout history, she has embodied any kind of label that you want to attach to, whether it be a river nymph, a goddess, a spirit of place, a genius loci. It really depends, because in terms of Sabrina, what we have today is more of a modern preaching or a modern aspect of the goddess in terms of what would have been prevalent in the ancient past of our Celtic ancestors and the people that would have settled near her riverbanks. So when I was researching the book, there wasn't actually a name given to the river in terms of the idea of Sabrina or Havren. The oldest name that we find of that appearing really is around about the 8th century, where the Welsh term Havren or Habren comes from that. And then later on, Geoffrey writes in the 12th century Habren in terms of the story. But we know fully well that the river was venerated. We knew that it was a highly spiritual place that people would have placated in order to irrigate their crops and to stave off any kind of destructive qualities or tendencies. As we all know, rivers, any kind of water really, is both benevolent and can be extremely destructive. It's temperamental in terms of their nature. But where we see her come through as a modern day goddess, so she would have been worshipped back then. Absolutely, the river would have been worshipped. But in terms of Sabrina as we have her today, we have really the poets of the early modern period and of the Tudor period to thank for that, because they are the ones who resurrected Sabrina or Havren from the ancient past and brought her forth in a new light to show her as this almost a tutelary mother figure, a guardian of the landscape, and someone who would rush to those who called out in need of her aid. But in terms of ancient history, we have the coalescence of different names attached to this river. So I've always said you can look at different aspects from etymology to archaeology to find out more information on that, which I've included in my book. And then, my God, I had many sleepless nights. I was pulling out my hair on the etymology alone because she has so many bloody names. It's like, girl, pick one.
Yes, because there is it is the Havren, if I'm pronouncing that right. Is that the original name? Was that the first name
Not
she
quite.
kind of had?
It's kind of like the first written name that we kind of have when it terms of historical documentation. So Havren comes from the old Middle Welsh, but that would have developed from the Proto-Celtic language of the indigenous Britons, or Brythonic, which would be Sabre or Sabren. So the S would have changed to H in the transformation of the Welsh language. But we do have different names. So there's multiple theories of where that comes from in terms of Savre or Sabre. So it said that when the Romans came over in their conquest of the lands of Britain, one theory is that they carried the name Sabrina with them in their arsenal. So they already had Sabrina in terms of the name, because we know that there is another river round in what we call Turkey today attached with the name Sabrina, which is the Karabudak River. So they had a plaque there showing that this is the River Sabrina. And when they came over to the Brythonic-speaking people, the name would have been unified almost in what they would have called it. Another theory says that the name comes from Samarosina, but there's only one attestation of that really from one piece of work. And that's quite outdated. That was formed many, many years ago in the theory. But now modern theories have come forward and said that the name does not attach to the word Samarosina at all, because it doesn't sound Brythonic in its sense. It sounds more that would speak of the more Gaelic languages. But the name might have originated from Sam Beruina, which means the waters that foam together. So that's very much in relation to the Seven Boar. And then later on you have all sorts of different names. So Havren itself is inherently tied to the word summer. So Hav means summer, and Ren is more of the flow, so the flow of summer. So it's inherently tied to the idea of the Celtic people might have had a relationship with the river in terms of seasonal changes. And so the river might have played a vital aspect in terms of the summer transition. And then when the Anglo-Saxons came over in their invasion, they called her Unla to mean misfortune, as many of their warriors would have drowned in her waters as the native Britons would have fled over, trying to escape persecution from them. And then, as we have it today, we have Sabrina, which anglicised later on to the word Severn, which is the modern name we have attached to the River Severn. So there's a lot of convoluted history there to try and unpick. Yeah, take your pick.
I think actually generally in Britain, really, we do have a lot of deities that are connected to rivers.
Yeah.
I think rivers were, as you say, they provided food, but they could also take lives as well. Particularly
Absolutely.
the River Severn is quite large and fast flowing in places, isn't it? So
Yes.
it would have been dangerous to some. So I think that's where a lot of air spirits came from, wasn't it? People would start revering the water and they would start giving it offerings and
Absolutely.
Please feed us, don't take our lives. Here, have some whatever it might be. We do have a history, don't we? We do like, as people, we like to throw things in the water.
Oh,
there
God,
is
absolutely.
It's across the globe, isn't it? There's water, let's chuck stuff in it.
Yeah.
Is that the same as River Severn? Because I know with rivers like the Thames, I know you mentioned it in the book, huge amounts of archaeological evidence have been unearthed from the Thames, haven't they? That people have thrown in there tools and spears and swords and shields and all number of stuff.
Yeah.
Was that the same for the River Severn?
Not quite, which I found really surprising, considering that she is the largest river. You'd expect to see a lot of remains or a lot of archaeological evidence that people would have deposited into the water. But in terms of other rivers like the River Humber or the River Thames, there's hardly any.
Okay.
And it begs the question, why? So there's multiple explanations as to why that could have occurred. I mean, it could have been that the offerings that the people gave to the river were more naturalistic and they would have degraded over time. And so the remnants of them are no longer in existence.
Yeah.
Or the river had a very different function in this region of the land compared to other rivers. So one of the theories as to why people make deposits into the river is to fortify them, is to strengthen them. Rivers represent the natural boundaries between different tribes or different people, and therefore by throwing weapons into the water, it was seen as a way to placate the deities and to ask for their intercession in order to defend the land, to strengthen them borders, to strengthen the boundary between the people. But because there's a lack of that in the River Severn itself, it goes to show that there may not have been a need in the earlier days as to the need for fortification. As we see later on in the Celtic landscape, also we have the Celtic tribes of the Cornovi, we have the Dobuni, we have the Ordovici, we have these tribes, and it shows that there might have possibly been a cultural transmission between these tribes of operations, that these people were constantly trading, they were constantly meeting at the hill forts. Because anyone that goes to my home or in the landscape, you'll know there is a heavy, heavy presence of hill forts. There's tons of them everywhere. You can't walk 5 minutes without bumping into one. But we know that there might have been cultural reverence there in these places where they would have come. We also know that there would have been places such as Woodhenges built along the River Severn. So one that is what's been discovered is called Sarna Bryn. So people would have gone there, that's been located by the river. And it begs the question whether people were going there as terms of seasonal frivolity or seasonal festivities. People would have gone there for trading. So the river itself wasn't seen as a place that may have needed a fortifying. We do have, things like swords and axes thrown in, or people would have deposited certain incantations or charms into the river to ask for the intercession. But in terms of the amount in comparison to the River Thames or any other river in Britain, it's quite small. You find them more in the bog body waterscapes, the bogs as more of the liminal places where people would have gone to see.
That's surprising, isn't it? Because of the size of it, you would have expected a lot more to be in there. And as I say, we do like to chuck stuff in the water. So
but perhaps there is more in there. We just haven't discovered. I mean, she is a big body of water, so who knows what lies at the depths.
Yes. Now, you mentioned mother figure earlier, and I know you've written about it in the book as well. I guess in my mind, I always had her as a maiden type figure without wanting to kind of put people in boxes or labels. Do you see her as a maiden figure, or is she really, or was she worshipped as a mother figure?
It's so the way I describe any kind of water deity, it's paradoxical. They are and they're not at the same time, because water is fluid. It changes its shape depending whatever container it's put in. So in terms of the idea of maiden and mother, I don't see Havren or Sabrina in terms of them specifically, but I see her as the whole encompassing aspects of throughout her history, because throughout the book I was writing, she has changed heavily. She's embodied aspects that pertain to Christianity. So they have the idea of the Virgin Mary figure. So that is that maternal aspect that runs through her history. But then when you look further on, the only archaeological evidence that you find relating to the River Severn actually comes in terms of a masculine deity, Nodens, who was more seen as a maritime deity in the location of the Severn Boar. So it's very much down in the Lydian Temple in Gloucestershire. And you see evidence of Nodens in that region, but you don't see evidence of a feminine deity. So I've always seen that Sabrina herself, as she is today, she is the unification of all the different aspects. So ultimately, to me, she's almost queer in that aspect, but she is not restricted to specific genders, but she'll change depending on the needs of the people. Like, guarantee in about 200 years' time, she will change again. But in terms of the idea of a mother figure, so in terms of all-encompassing parental figure, should I say, I derived that more so from the idea that water itself is a nourishing element. We are comprised of water. We are intrinsically tied to water. So you have that metaphorical connection to water being symbolic in terms of gestational fluid, that we are enveloped in the waters of the womb and we are birthed into life. And water is everywhere in our nature. It comprises our body. It's everywhere. So there is that aspect of a overarching presence that we cannot live without, and we have to make sure that we respect in order to make sure that we respect ourselves and respect the environment that we're around in terms of more animistic qualities. But maternally, or the mother figure, comes from the works of Michael Drayton. So Michael Drayton was writing at the time when there was a bit of political fragmentation. So it was a time when King James VI of Scotland and the First of England was trying to unify England and Scotland. And as we all know, that's the most famous part of the witch trials. So it was quite a heavily awful period in terms of religious fighting between Catholics and Protestants. But Michael Drayton wrote in his big I thought it's a poem, isn't it? It's a Polly Albion, it's called. That when it comes to the Welsh Marches region, Sabrina was the overarching sovereign figure of the Welsh Marches, that she was trying to settle this dispute between the English and the Welsh over the ownership of Lundy Island, and she said eventually that it belongs to both of you. Stop bickering. But later, yeah, literally. But later on, she falls into such a heavy turmoil and grief. Her heart cannot be satisfied because of all the atrocity and the colonization and the subjugation of the Welsh people and of the land itself. That can't be reconciled. That can't be reconciled until the ancient lands of the Welsh Marches are given back to their ancient mother, until places like Shropshire, Hereford, Cheshire, Gloucestershire are given back to their rightful ownership of Cymru. And so the idea of the unification of the people under one name, under Britain, under this homogenized identity, would be seen as an injustice. And so she crumbles under this pressure. And that's basically a warning to the people reading it to say, hey, you have these cultural aspects that you must tie onto rather than them being subjugated onto one aspect on this one overarching name. The maiden aspect, however, comes from the works of John Milton, which I think is probably one of the most famous recollections of Sabrina in literature.
That's the one I'm familiar with.
And people who are not familiar with the story, just to summarize it, basically, there is this character called Comus, who is the representation of hedonism and debauchery. He's basically a manic, crazy, magical magician who has this retinue of half-breed animal human people, which a lot of people have said to be representation of the Welsh Marches figures or Welsh Marches population, because back in them days, people didn't see the Welsh Marches people as, as very well-rounded people. They didn't belong to England or Wales. They were this awful intermediary people, and that was to be feared. But Comus runs with this retinue of people, and eventually he stumbles across a woman and her two brothers, and he steals her, the lady as she's called in the story. And her brothers have to run off to go find the shepherd, and the shepherd tells them, go invoke Sabrina, go invoke her, she will come and help you. And they sing to the goddess, and you'll find this poetry on many of the plaques of statues that surround in Britain. And they sing to her, and Sabrina comes out as this fair maiden, this virtuous, chaste being who is very much the paragon of Christian virtue. And she comes over to rescue the lady by bestowing on her magical waters to break the charm of Comus. And then she goes back to the water. So that's where the idea of the maiden comes from. But that maiden aspect comes very much from a time of heavy Christian domination in the culture. So it's the idea that any kind of pagan aspect would have been stripped of Sabrina to represent her as this chaste woman, as this beautiful virginal queen almost. Because we all know back in those days, if you showed any more than a bloody ankle if you were a woman, my God, you'd be lynched. Do you know what I mean? We can't have a deity showing their breasts and all sorts, the whole pagan wild aspects. Oh no. You know what I mean? So I see her as this whole rounded figure.
Right. That does make... Actually, it's interesting you're saying about the gender of deities. We do personify them, don't we? We do.
Absolutely.
Anthropomorphize. I can never say that word.
Oh, it's a hard word, isn't it? I've got such a massive gap in my teeth. Every time I try and say it, I just spit everywhere.
But we do, don't we? We put this idea that all of the deities must be human form and they must fit into the masculine, feminine. But actually, I mean, for all we know, deity could be purple blobs with 18 heads, couldn't they?
Oh, that'd be wonderful.
But we do, don't we? We put this image on them.
Yeah,
so
it's
that
a
we
way...
can relate to them, I guess, isn't it? But it's
Absolutely.
interesting that whatever period of time they're dealt with, whatever religion is dealing with them, their image changes to fit that kind of box, that label.
Yeah, it all harks back to that aspect of reciprocity between our deities. So yeah, we do personify them and anthropomorphize, and I hope that's right.
You said it better than I did.
In order to form a relation to them, but that isn't the be or end all. Like, even us as people today, we have so many different aspects and so many different faces that we show both to the external and to the internal worlds closest. So when I see people talk about dating in such rigid forms, like they are this, they are that, I don't know. And to me, it's a very cut off glimpse into deity, and that deity is whatever we want it to be, but they will show themselves in however we feel comfortable in recognizing it. That's not the be all end all.
Yeah, I think it is. And I do have this thing that if you do a Google search for an image, so if you were to search for a specific deity, picking one off the top of my head, Ariane Rod, put her into Google, you'll get generally images where they're the beautiful lady dressed in a Arthurian robe. If you search for one of the Greek ones, you will get a beautiful lady dressed in a toga. Why did they never turn up in their jeans? Why did they...
Exactly.
Why?
Where's your Balenciagas?
Exactly. They should be allowed to wear that if they want to.
Absolutely.
Modern times.
When I've envisioned Sabrina or Havren, whenever I've gone to the river and I've performed my magic there, like, she comes into all sorts of shapes and sizes. Like, sometimes she'll appear to me in the form of a swan, or sometimes I'll see her wearing this biker jacket with high heels. I'm like, yes, queen, wear those heels. Or sometimes I'll vision her as, this masculine form of Nodens. I mean, she is everything and all. So throw at me whatever she wants, I'll take it.
I think we need to be more open to that, don't we? We need to be that deity are just fluid.
Absolutely.
Really.
And they can change. Yeah. They appear in every aspect. I mean, look at the Greek and the Norse pantheon. My God, they transform themselves in all sorts of shapes and sizes. So the same can be the same here in Britain.
Definitely. Although the Greeks, probably the climate being a little bit warmer, they generally have less clothes on there.
Yes,
it's a bit nippy here for just, a drape
they'll
of
be wearing
fabric.
their fur coats here. It's too cold to get undressed.
No, I think it is. I think it's important that we are open to the fluidity of deity. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We do like to put things in boxes, don't we? Now, you've mentioned the river and you've mentioned the counties. A question from me. Do you see Sabrina solely as a Welsh goddess, or do you see her as English, British, further?
This is a really difficult question, really. And when I was writing it, it kind of nitpicked at my own identity a little bit. And I suppose at the idea of what we call or classify as borders, on the demarcation of those borders. In terms of Havren, she operates within such a liminal history between English and Welsh that I think it'd be a disservice to call her strictly just one of them. I mean, a lot of people would argue that she is Welsh because she originates from Powys. She originates from high up in Piliman Fawr, which is the Cambrian Mountains, and she flows through the Welsh towns of Llanidloes and Newydd, which is the places where I grew up. And then other people call her English because she just flows through the counties that we would call England today, which is obviously through Shropshire, through Worcestershire, through Gloucestershire. But when I talk about the Welsh Marches, we are talking about a hinterland or a cultural nexus, a place that is inherently distinct and unique in terms of its identity, its culture and its history compared to the rest of Britain. So in terms of Sabrina either being English or Welsh, I would say she's both and she's neither at the same time. And it kind of relates back to that paradoxical idea of water deity. So
diplomatic answer.
Yeah, diplomatic. It's exactly. It's because it is. I mean, because obviously I'm biased. I do kind of lean towards the Welsh side, if you know what I mean. But
yeah,
when we talk about the Welsh Marches, people might hear this, they might not know what that means. When we talk about the Welsh Marches, it is this indirect cultural fluctuation between certain lands that operate within the border between England and Wales. So we know that this land had a very kind of a change of the border, should I say, a change of border since the Celtic period. We know that from a standpoint. And we know that these lands are inherently tied to the Welsh cultural landscape. We know that we have the bardic poetry that are pertaining to these lands, especially pertaining to the aspect of hiraeth, that deep nostalgic longing, that heartbreaking longing for Wales. But then later on, we have the invasion of the Saxons and the Normans, and it was the Normans that composed the idea of the Welsh Marches, meaning border, in the 11th century. And in this region, way up until about the 16th to the 17th century, under the Acts of Union under King Henry VIII, when Wales was subsumed into England, this land operated as distinct in terms of legality, in judicial practice, and in economy. So the Marcher Lords had independence away from the sovereign crown, that they could do whatever they wanted, basically, unless they died, and then the king would obviously get involved. And that's not to romanticize it, it's like we were this distinct intermediate. There was a time of conquest and of bloodshed and of warfare, and all that trickles into the mythos of Sabrina and Havren. Her water still has the memories of bloodshed to this day. So in this region, you have what's termed Anglo-Welsh as an identity. even with me. So I grew up in Shropshire, and I grew up in Wales and Powys as well. And so, although I was born in Shropshire, people would like to label me, oh, you're English. But then, if you really want to harken back to it, my identity isn't tied straight to Welsh culture. I speak the language. I try to anyway. I I grew up in Wales. I grew up in a Welsh family. I grew up in all these aspects. And if you want to be really pedantic about it, Shropshire shouldn't even be England in the first place. It only became England when it was subsumed after the conquest and after the Acts of Union. So in terms of England, it's only been English since the 17th century properly, if we were really pedantic about it, after the Counts of the Marches was eradicated. But Sabrina embodies all of that. She embodies all of it. And then in terms of British identity, I mean, she is the biggest river of all. I suppose that is a massive aspect of the terms of British identity. But I think one aspect can't prevail over the other. We have to see the different aspects of it and appreciate them for what they are and the differences between them. So, although that is a very convoluted answer, I do apologise. It's something that I can't fully comprehend myself, because I think every person who has a relationship with the river will have a different answer. But I think in order to respect the goddess and to form a relationship to her, we have to respect her history, and that history is inherently tied to the idea of borders. Because I've always said borders are nothing more than administrative fallacies put in place by those who are higher up in hierarchy. They don't denote the culture of the people. They don't denote the identity of the people. So if people want to see her as an English deity, go ahead. But if people want to see her as a Welsh identity, absolutely, all is fine. She's all encompassing of that. But I think for me personally, she is both and neither at the same time, because it harkens back to the idea of the establishment of the Welsh Marches.
Good answer.
Thank you.
Good answer.
Thank you.
So you obviously have a huge amount of knowledge. When you were writing the book, when you began your research, where did you start? What sources of information are there for her?
So I think I had to go back to my childhood and go back to the very first two stories that are told about Sabrina. So the first one is the history of the Kings of Britain in 1136, written by Geoffrey of Monmouth, where she is the bastard, illegitimate child of King Locrinus of England and Estrildus, and she later becomes drowned along with her mother in the river by Locrinus's wife, Gwendolen. I remember reading that and thought, oh my God, It's like an episode of Jeremy Kyle. Bloody hell, you cheat on me, I'll go drown you. It's quite violent.
But all good deity stories are like that, aren't they?
Absolutely. I mean, if a genesis of a deity isn't shrouded in some kind of bloody warfare, they're not really a deity. And then she transforms into the goddess. And then later you go into the works of Bill Gwilym and Thomas Habington, and John Rhys as well, who recall this Welsh folklore aspect of a river nymph who was born to a mountain giant called Pumlummon. And we don't know where exactly that originates from. We don't actually know where that source is, but we do know it's part of the oral culture of Wales and wider. So she is the daughter of Pumlummon, along with her sisters, Rhedol and Gwy, also known as the rivers of Rhedol and the River Wye. Sometimes Rhedol is interchanged with Ystwyth, but the original is Rhedol. And you do find other river aspects as well, depending which source you write on. So there's rivers such as Mynach, Llafnant, there's Dilas as well. So those are the two main aspects I want to draw upon, where they come from. And then later I went to etymology, where does her name come from? And trying to piece together the venerated practices of the ancient Celtic people and of the Norman people as well as the folklorical practices. So how ordinary people would have used the river in their daily life. So Sabrina was very much the component of the Industrial Revolution. So her river played a massive aspect on that. And I wanted to see how people would have interacted with the river and what stories would have been told. So that's when I found different aspects of folk magical practices where people would have gone to the river, such as Limmel Times, the Dusk to Dawn, and would have asked the river for the veneration. That's when I found different books and sources written from the archives in Shropshire and across Wales, where people would take bricks, funny enough, from the river and place them on their tables as a sort of way of protection from flooding. God knows why a brick. I mean, you do you. We love a resourceful person. And then I looked at the idea of syncretization as well, because although a lot of people like to argue the idea of pagan survivals, that certain Christian saints are pagan deities hiding, or they are dwelling beneath the surface, I wanted to really look into that aspect, because the one important contribution, I suppose, that can be found in the River Severn is the bestowment of about over 50, if not more, churches dedicated to the Virgin Mary. And I thought to myself, why Mary? Why her? And obviously Mary has these maritime epithets. She is, the queen of the sea, the queen of the star. Like she was very much practiced within, the sailor maritime culture. And for her church to be established all along the riverbank, a lot of people say, oh my God, that must be the deity of the river being hidden behind. But it's a lot more complex than that. It's a lot more exchange. It's almost seen that Sabrina and Mary on different aspects would have exchanged between each other. They would have taken different aspects of each other's mythos, and that would have shown in towards modern day culture. So I think when it all boils down, that the river is always seen as this idea of veneration towards maternity, towards parental aspects, that this is a caring river that wants to nourish the landscape, and you can see that in the mythos itself. In terms of other ways as well, one of the other sources I went towards is the Mabinogi. So that is one of the most beautiful collection of stories and mythologies of Welsh culture and of the Welsh cultural continuum. And when you look at the original 4 branches, you don't see the River Severn mentioned at all because it's hidden, but it is in there, and you'll see it pertain to other stories. So in the first branch, when Ternan loses his foals, when this gigantic, huge claw is coming through the stables and grabbing his foals, we see an aspect of that relating to the River Severn. So if we translate the name Ternan, it's like the king of the raging waters, which we know would have been in relation to the seventh boar, because that's the region where that story takes place. So the idea of the hand coming through from the other world, from a Nodens, has this otherworldly feel to it. Taking these horses can be seen as an aspect of that otherworldly influence on our world, and that the water itself is the access or the portal to the other world. And we also see it in the other more wide, expansive stories beyond the 4 branches of the Mabinogi. So that's the other stories of Mabinogion, such as Cilwch ac Olwen, where we have a character called Mabon. Mabon is stolen from his mother, and he's imprisoned in Caerloyw, which is modern-day Gloucestershire. And it is said that his relationship to that waterscape itself pertains back to his mother. So Modron is his mother, which means the divine mother, because we have that suffix at the end on, which means divinity. And a lot of writers in my research have shown that certain topographical aspects of the river, certain islands that are in the river, have this almost shape of a fecund woman with large bosoms and wide hips. So there's an argument that could have seen that the aspects of the landscape itself gave birth to the idea of divinity, the idea of Modron, the divine mother of Wales, being connected to the water itself. And we know Modron has this connection to Matrona, who is found in the River Marne, or I think I'm pronouncing that River Marne over in France. What else did I find as well? There's all sorts of different aspects of my research as well pertaining to animals. So in Cilwch ac Olwen as well, the oldest animal is the Sauna Senlliw, and that itself is found within the River Severn. The animal, the most wisest and oldest of all, comes forth with the most beautiful wisdom to try and help King Arthur's men try and rescue Mabon. So it has that aspects of wild ingenuity to it as well. So yeah, there was a lot of different sources I went through, but to find them all, I really had to prick at them with a fine-tooth comb a little bit, because it's not quite there on the surface. You have to really dig deep and find everything to it in terms of ghost stories, in terms of folklore, in terms of ancient archaeology. I had to go to so many bloody museums and ask, hey, have you got anything on this goddess? And they looked at me like, what? Yeah, it's hard. In fact, one of the things I didn't include in my book, I kind of kicked myself on it now, and I'll mention it on the podcast as a little exclusive. In the Shrewsbury Museum, there is this almost decapitated head that exists in there. It is very much a masculine presenting deity. And I thought, who is that? Because a lot of people might presume it's Zeus, or maybe another different deity, or should I say Jupiter in terms of the Roman names, because they would have been found mainly in that region of Viriconia or Rochester, where the River Severn flows through, which is one of the 4th largest Roman settlement. But when I was researching, going through the archives, I found a piece of writing going back to, I think, around the 20th century, of these men who gathered together and said, hey, this is a male divinity of the River Severn. And I thought to myself, oh my God, could this possibly be Nodens, who has formerly been thought of before being attached to the lower part of the Severn Bore, going extend all the way up to the River Severn towards Shropshire, and his presence being there. I thought, okay, we have another archaeological aspect here. I mean, it's not accurate, it's not like 100% conclusive, but it's something that we can feed through. And I think a lot of my writing as well, I think I've mentioned quite a few times in the book, it could be this, it could be that. There's no 100% guarantee. It just is what it is. You take what you want from it. But in terms of resources, my lord, it was a headache to get through it all.
Yeah, we do struggle, I think, at least with Welsh deities. There is the Mabinogi. With English deities, there's nothing.
Yeah.
Like you say, you have to go to museums, you have to sort through bits and pieces of archaeological evidence, and it is a lot of guesswork, let's be honest. But it is fascinating what you have pulled together. And actually, you mentioned the other world there.
Yes.
Do you think there's a connection between Sabrina and the other world?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So I think in certain stories coming from Welsh culture, we do see the presence of the River Severn being used as almost like a portal to another or to the other world. Because water always has that otherworldly presence. We see it. It's a ubiquitous force across all cultures and all beliefs that water is the gateway to divinity. But in terms of the specific locale, we see the River Severn connected to a character called Gwyn ap Nudd. So Gwyn ap Nudd is another Welsh deity. And funny enough, interestingly, so the name Gwyn ap Nudd translates to Gwyn, son of mist. So Nudd means mist. And Nudd comes to us from a long history of transformation of the name all the way from Nodens, actually. So Nodens itself translates from mist to have that watery aspect of the mist, of that otherworldly feeling. And how it relates to the Severn. So in one of the resources that I found, we find an epithet that could be related to Gwyn ap Nudd, known as the Brenin Llwyd, or the Grey King, who is said to ride upon these misty mountaintops, especially around in Eryri, which was Snowdonia in the English language, or in Pinlimon, which is where Sabrina originates from. So the idea of the Brenin Llwyd riding upon the hilltops around in these watery, bog, marshy places where the River Severn is connected to has that otherworldly feeling. We also have otherworldly women attached to the Severn as well. So we have the witches of Caerloyw, who fight against King Arthur's men in another tale of the Mabinogion, attached to Gloucestershire and its proximity to the River Severn itself. And we also have that otherworldly ghost feel to it as well. My God, there's so many spirits attached to the River Severn, because unfortunately the River Severn is a devastating force to be reckoned with, and a lot of people have lost their lives to the Severn. A lot of people have jumped in either from their own volition to go swimming. Unfortunately, they drowned, or people have, met unfortunate circumstances, shall I say. And so their spirits are tied to that waterscape, and you do see different presences of spirits, such as monks walking down the pathways of the banks. We see Roman soldiers. And one of the most interesting stories I found was the idea of the ghost barge, which comes from the Middle Ages. We talk about the Black Plague, that people will witness this otherworldly barge float on the Severn, carrying these corpses that have died from the Black Plague, going forth on its transportation route. So it definitely has that otherworldly feeling to it, I definitely say. And I think, I probably should mention, because I've just off the top of my head just remembered, we find it in the triads. So in the Trioedd Ynys Prydain, which is the triads of the island of Britain, we find the presence of pigs related to the Severn. And one of the most famous of them is Henwen, who comes forth from the waters, and she bestows so beautiful agricultural gifts to South Wales, but devastating gifts to the north. So she gives birth to the calf Palig, this monstrous cat that wreaks devastation. And we know fully well from Celtic culture that pigs are inherently tied to the otherworld. They come from the otherworld, and they have this formidable power to shape the course of destiny for those who interact with them. And the fact that Henwen, along with other pigs such as the Torch Troedd from Cilwch ac Olwen as well, come from the River Severn. So they come from the islands, they go into the water to re-emerge back onto Welsh soil. It inherently ties the aspect of pigs to the water, to divinity, to Sabrina. So you can see it all in one cyclical nature there.
Brilliant. I do love pigs. Pigs are one of my animals.
I love them. They don't get enough love. They really don't.
No. They are very intelligent creatures.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I love it. I go visit a farm quite frequently. I absolutely love them. People think I'm so weird doing baby talk when I'm reaching over and scratching behind this pig's ear. Like, I love them. I love them. They're babies.
I had the amazing experience of living and working on a pig farm in my youth. So
I love that.
Fantastic creatures.
But
actually, that brings me to a question. Are there any animals or symbols that are associated with Sabrina? I think you mentioned the swan earlier, and pigs, obviously.
Yeah, so I think salmon is one of the major animals tied to the River Severn. So it comes from the salmon fin too, but also it has that aspect that when we are near water, we feel some internal change within us. We have that beautiful transformation of our emotions that we almost feel like we belong, that we're home. And salmon themselves, they are born with this ability to go back to where they come from. They have this ability of homing, to memorize where they originate from, and to travel thousands and thousands of miles to come back into the breeding grounds so they can spawn again. And I think that has such a beautiful spiritual message for us to use within our lives, this metaphor that no matter where we are, whenever we're in the presence of water, we are home, because water connects all living things upon earth. Yes, the swan as well. I think the swan's more of a personal gnosis in terms of animal connections. We do have stories of the swans being connected to the Severn in terms of witchcraft, and in terms of more folkloric stories told to children. But in my own personal practice, it is the swan who is the major symbol for me, for Sabrina, for Havrin. So in many folkloric tales or in many mythological stories, the swan can almost be seen in a tainted view. It is this beautiful yet tragic creature. As we know, many swans can be seen as the otherworldly messengers when people have suddenly passed away and their soul will be transmutated into this swan figure. Or we find in legends or popular stories and children's stories where, a woman is transformed into a swan from an evil magician's curse, and she's born to suffer in this form until the spell's broken. And I feel, to me personally, knowing the story of Sabrina or Havrin, who was drowned in the River Severn because of other people's actions, the idea of the swan representing her as that form of this tragedy is so pertinent, I feel, that it does synthesize everything of the culture and of the aspects of Sabrina and of wider Welsh identity as well, having that tragedy entrusted upon the culture, being recognised by the idea of the swan. Whenever I visit the river, I have such a profound relationship with the swans there, so I will go and feed them. I'll sit under the willow trees. In fact, one of the very first times I ever encountered Sabrina properly, when I stepped into the identity of a witch, I called out to her, I worked magic, and when I closed my eyes and I was, thinking about her and trying to really get into that magical thinking, I opened them. 2 swans peered towards me. One was sat next to me by my hip.
Brilliant.
And the other had its head on my knees. And from that moment, I thought, this is it. This it was a very profound spiritual moment for me. And ever since then, I go and feed swans. So I will try and make my own swan food. I'll go defrost peas and I'll go feed them, and I absolutely love them. I mean, I wouldn't recommend anyone go and approach any random swan, especially in breeding season, because you'll get murdered.
They can be quite ferocious, guys.
They can. But because I have a relationship with these swans, I like to think that they remember me, they know me, they feel safe with me, and I think by proxy, I am showing my reverence towards Sabrina by helping to feed her animals, by helping pick up litter on the river. And I think another animal as well, it's inescapable really, and that's sheep. You wouldn't think it really, because people look at sheep and think, oh my god, these docile, imbecile creatures that have no brains, but they are the most beautiful creatures. I grew up with them, as a child. I absolutely adore them. They're very much fluffy dogs to me. I mean, I've had my fair share of them headbutting me here and there, but that shit comes with the territory. But in one of the poems we have from the Romantic period is from, I can't remember his name now. It's called The Fleece. The poem's called The Fleece. And in this poetry, it recalls how the shepherds would transport their sheep across the Welsh landscape, and they would bathe them in the river, and they would ask the goddess to protect them from any kind of disease or ailment that would be inflicted upon the sheep. And in return, they would give offerings of flowers and sweet-smelling plants to the river as an offering. And I love that because, obliviously, if this was true, which I believe it is, because in the Welsh Marches we have such a huge wool industry in that region, that people were wearing wool. People were wearing wool that was blessed by the water in this ritualistic practice that they were completely oblivious to. So the clothes that they were wearing, or the blankets that they were wrapping themselves around, were automatically blessed by a goddess, and that came from the practice of the shepherds. So that inherently ties sheep to the River Severn as well.
Yeah, perfect. And practical as well, because the sheep would have literally been washed and cleaned, and practical, spiritual. Yeah. Nice connection.
It's all there.
Yeah. So if from a practical magic point of view, what would you work with Sabrina for? What would you call upon her for?
I think if you had to summarize it down to a few main points, or to find aspects which the goddess would be probably more suited to, I would probably say anything magically related to protection, to establishment of boundaries. So we know that Sabrina was a protectress. We do know that she was seen as this defender in terms of, in the later writings of her, where people would go towards her to request her aid and to basically placate her to say, hey, come and help me. We especially that comes from the works of John Milton as well, when she arises from the waters and she helps the lady who's in distress. And so she breaks the charm that's placed upon her by Comus. So anything to do with protection, the establishment of borders in terms of her own personal boundaries herself towards other people, Sabrina's definitely pertinent in that aspect. I think as well, in terms of cleansing, any kind of water aspect that relates to magic can be related to Sabrina. So anything to do with cleansing, purification, as well. I think as well, although a lot of people kind of turn a blind eye to it depending what their practice is, I think cursing as well. So as I said before, water has those nourishing capabilities, but it also has those destructive capabilities as well. And water is a powerful element, and it can leave ruin wherever it flows. It has the propensity to change its course wherever it wants to go, so it won't be contained. And I think that is a revelation that we can use as witches or as pagans, that we ourselves have power. We have our own intrinsic power that we can access when we feel powerless. And I think, although I would never say to people, you have to curse, you have to do this, cursing is an intrinsic part of the history of witchcraft. And I believe, especially living in a modern age where the very threat of oppression is prevalent in our society, I think it's now or never. And I think Sabrina is extremely capable of doing that. So we have, in terms of across Britain, people going to rivers, writing their charms in request of aid of their deities and throwing it into the river. In fact, we have a charm in the Nodens temple around in the Seventh Ball where a Roman wrote to Nodens saying, hey, my ring has been stolen. May this person never have health, may they never sleep again until it's returned to me, which some people say was the basis of J.R. Tolkien's inspiration for the One Ring in Lord of the Rings. The One Ring gone. So yeah, I definitely say cursing as well, but I think it's extremely important for me to mention, especially living in the 21st century where we have to be more environmentally conscious. In terms of magic, we have to separate ourselves from more personal aspects of magic, and we have to work more magic that's beneficial towards our environment. So magic relating to healing the environment, magic that works to gathering more respect and more enchantment to our rivers, that should be taking the forefront at the moment. So in my own personal practice, anything that helps increase environmental consciousness or helps enchant people to come back to them to read the stories or to help respect the river, so to help cleanse it in any way I can, that should be at the forefront of my magic and of people's magic as well, in terms of modern day practice as well. Because like I said, our deities aren't static, they don't stagnate in these old representations, they change with the times. And unfortunately, we are living in times of increased pollution in our rivers.
Oh, yeah, that's paramount. Yeah, we've got to look after the planet. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So if someone was looking to connect with Sabrina,
yes,
where would they start?
So if they are in Britain, or if they are in the Welsh Marches or in Wales, or wherever they may find themselves in terms of proximity to the river, I think the most important aspect is to go out and form a relationship with the water itself, with the River Severn itself. And although it is quite a dangerous river, there are certain designated spots where you can safely swim. And I think there's no better aspect than to experience water, to experience deity, than swim. Of course, he can't swim, that's completely fine. But, even putting your feet in, just touching the water, collecting the water, is a way to show representation of the deity in your home, in your personal life, that she's in close proximity to you. I will warn though, in terms of folklore, there is a piece that says that the goddess can't be contained within a vessel for too long, or else she will start bashing against it and you'll never get a good night's sleep. So I never harbour her water for longer than a week or two.
Wise words.
And then I think if you want to establish a relationship to the river, but you aren't here in this landscape, if you are located elsewhere, it might seem a bit strange to work with a deity who's so localized. But as I said before, the river water itself goes from Pindamon all the way to the sea. And that water is the same everywhere else. It connects all landscapes, all places. So wherever water is, you're in the presence of divinity, whether that is a goddess or a god of a certain locality, or if it is Sabrina, which you choose to work with. And also in the presence of rain. In the nymph story where she and her sisters transport themselves down from the mountain towards the Seven Sea, they ride upon the clouds to visit their father. And that is the hydrological cycle. So wherever rain is present, you have the goddess there in her form. But in terms of working with her, I do want to put out, because it's a really important aspect, is that Sabrina wasn't just confined to the River Severn itself. She emigrated to America. So she has potential and power to be taken from the land that birthed her and to find herself within the cultural proximity of other places. So one of the things I found fascinating was her connection to the Amherst College in Massachusetts. So in the 19th century, this £300 statue was taken over there and it was established in the college dormitory. But then it developed into a very strange custom in which the odd and the even years would battle it out to try and capture her, to try and take her, and to claim ownership over her so that she could sit at their grand feasts and they would sing their alumni songs to her. And that sounds quite, fun. It sounds quite joyous, but it got quite violent at times where the odd and even years would fight each other. They'd even shoot each other. And Sabrina, the poor Sabrina statue, she'd be thrown about the place. She'd be dumped down a well. She'd be found in the River Connecticut. She was transported in a net on a helicopter across the football field. She was even found in a sausage factory. So
okay,
it was quite a strange custom. But even now, in the modern day, where people have found the statue, and she sits at the heart of the college campus itself as this enduring symbol of strength. Because a lot of people have written, because this college campus was fraternity? Yeah, it was for boys that went there. People have come today say like the practices that they were doing were inherently misogynistic. They were sexist because this half-naked woman statue being thrown back and forth between these men, it doesn't have the greatest connotations, despite even the people writing about it said it was spiritual. I digress. I wouldn't call it spiritual, but nowadays it is, because the people that have restored her back to her physical self see her as a symbol of opportunity, see her as a symbol of endurance. They see her as a feminist symbol, that after all this stuff that's been done to her, she still stands strong at the heart. She's still there. And I think that's bloody beautiful. And it just goes to show that the culture of a deity can change and be transported to a different place. But in terms of working with the deity, anything that helps promote consciousness towards the environment, so that's litter picking, using your voice to promote the health of our rivers, going out and protesting, using your voice to argue towards MPs, to write letters and to raise awareness, to sign petitions, anything like that can help expose the damage and destruction that are happening to our rivers. So I think one of the things people really get struck down by, and it's all the fault of the capitalist structure that we are abiding to, unfortunately, is that people feel that they have to go out and they have to go out protest every weekend. They have to do this, they have to do that. And unfortunately, we're shackled because we have these commitments to these working hours that we have to fulfill each and every day.
That earning a living thing.
Yeah, we have
rubbish.
to earn a living. We have to earn a living. And people really get bogged down because they don't feel like they're doing enough. But by using your voice, sharing, promoting petitions, you are doing something. So in my own personal practice, I can't go to every single protest I want. I can't just willy-nilly travel down to London because it's bloody expensive. Yeah. And I don't have much time off myself. But what I will do is that I will crochet certain pieces and I will go and sell them, and I'll give money to charities that help fund towards increasing environmental health. But even litter picking, going out to your waterscape, any deity found in that waterscape, especially Sabrina, would appreciate, picking out that rubbish. But I will say as well, for health and safety concerns, go wear gloves. And if you see things like, glass bottles, syringes, or leaky condoms, go ask like a park attendant to help pull them out of the road. You don't want to be touching that. But there's just little things that you can do each day, being conscious of how much water you use. Yeah, every little thing. Yeah. That's the best way you can work with a deity.
Absolutely. She is a fascinating goddess, absolutely fascinating. And a last question to round up with, because we could talk for hours, I'm sure. But
we could.
New adventures, new projects, what's in the planning?
Oh, I am so excited. So I adore Moonbooks and I am so honoured to be an author. I love it, honestly. It's been such a wonderful experience. So Sabrina is my first. That kicked open the door for me. I have just accepted a contract for a book titled The Magic of the Welsh Marches, Witchcraft and Enchantment on the Celtic Fringes. So that will really extrapolate all the folklore, all the magic, and everything that's contained within these lands that have been ignored by both English and Welsh people. That shows this distinct and unique place that has such beautiful folklore that I think the world should know about, and of course magic as well. So that will really dive into things like giants, it'll dive into saints, it'll dive into folk magic, specifically folk magic, and how you can practice that within your own personal practice. And it'll also dive into things like well worship as well. So even if it is specifically rooted in the Welsh Marches landscape, it is almost going to be a guide on how you can use this as a temporary foundation in order to go and find the magic that resides in your own backyard and take inspiration from this. And yeah, I do have quite a few other books in the pipeline, which I'm currently working to submit to Moonbooks. So watch this space. I've got quite a few.
I think folk magic it covers the whole of Britain, doesn't it? And I think you can take bits and pieces from wherever landscape you're in and make it work. You mentioned wells. There is a huge history of well magic across Britain. So fascinating. I look forward to that. Absolutely.
Oh, thank you. Oh, I should mention as well, one of the aspects I will hopefully promote it as well. I am going to be writing a chapter about a specific piece of bardic poetry that hasn't been written before in terms of a pagan magical aspect, and that is poetry that goes back to the 9th, 10th century, known as the Canu Heledd. So I think that'll be really, hopefully, inspiring to people who want to learn more about cultural Welsh aspects as well.
Brilliant.
So, yeah.
Brilliant. And I'm just going to throw it in here.
Yeah.
The Virgin Mary,
Yes.
a book. I'm just saying.
Oh, I do hope so. I have got inkling. I won't lie.
So I know you work with her, and I think there are a lot of pagans actually that do work with Mary.
Do you know what? My coven hit the mick out of me.
aspects.
My coven hit the mick out of me. They think I'm a secret Catholic. I'm going to do a Doreen. Is it Doreen virtue? I'll come in one day and be like, this is all devil worshipping pagan stuff. But no, I love the Virgin Mary.
I think she's. I know quite a lot of pagans, and I have worked with her in the past as well. I think she's a fascinating energy to work with. So I'm just going to put that one in your pile.
Absolutely,
well.
She's in there.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Brett. It's been an
thank you.
absolute pleasure talking to you. The knowledge that you have is amazing.
Thank you.
And I am incredibly proud and honoured to be walking beside you at Moonbooks. So thank you.
Likewise. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute honour. Thank you for having me. I've loved it.
You're very welcome. And thank you to everyone listening and watching. And do join us again next time on the Pagan Portals podcast.
You have been listening to the Pagan Portal Podcast, a Moonbooks Publishing production. For more information, please visit our website.